My wife betrayed me with my CEO boss. I lost my job, my family, and even my child. On my lowest night, I gave my only coat to a freezing homeless man. Days later, 12 black SUVs surrounded me. The man who stepped out left everyone shocked. All in a swoon. Could still feel the sting of the words echoing in my mind, even though it had been weeks since they were spoken. Weeks them looks. Since I'd been reduced to nothing. Walking through the cold Texas night, I wasn't just battling the chill in the air. No, it was something hadn't gold. It was something deeper, a gnawing emptiness that had hollowed out everything I once was. I'd always been proud of the life I built. I had a family I loved, a career I worked tirelessly to sustain, but it all crumbled so quickly. My fingers clenched against the chill as I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, my breath coming out in heavy, visible puffs. The streetlights above flickered weakly, casting an eerie, yellow glow over the empty sidewalks. The city, usually filled with the noise of life, now felt lifeless to me. The only sound was the soft crunch of my boots on the snow, a rare sight in Texas. The flakes danced around me, like the remnants of something pure, before they disappeared into the darkness. How had everything gone so wrong? I kept asking myself that as I walked, trying to outrun the memories. The sign of Regina. My wife, in bed, with Case Harlow. The man who had been my boss, the one who promised me loyalty, would not leave my mind. It wasn't just that betrayal that stung. It was everything after. The humiliating firing, the public disgrace. The way my world seemed to turn on me overnight. At least the pain kept me awake. I was walking, moving forward, even if it felt like I was moving through molasses. I didn't want to stop. Didn't want to think too much. The house. Gone. I couldn't even afford to keep the small apartment I had rented after losing everything. The last shred of my pride. The coat I wore, the only thing I hadn't sold, was about to become just another thing to lose. The cold bit through my jacket, and I shivered, but it wasn't just from the weather. The loneliness, the isolation. It all cut through me like a knife. The worst part wasn't the cold though. No. It was how alone I felt. As if I didn't even matter anymore. You're a failure. Hayden. I whispered to myself, the voice in my head cold and accusing, like a memory I couldn't shake. I used to think I was something. Now I'm nothing. I stopped at the edge of a park, staring at the empty, snow-covered benches. The place was always deserted at night, even in better times. But tonight, it felt different. It felt as if the world had abandoned me, just as everyone else had. I hadn't planned on staying. I was just passing through. The shortest route to the dingy motel I was staying at. I glanced around, making sure no one was around. But then, I saw him. An old man, curled up on one of the benches, his ragged coat barely covering his frail body. His hands were shaking, his breath barely visible in the frigid air. The bench he lay on was dusted with snow, and his face was hidden in the shadows. I paused, uncertain. I couldn't just walk away. Something inside me stirred. Maybe it was the memory of my own helplessness, or maybe the guilt that had been eating away at me for weeks. I couldn't say. But I found myself walking toward him. I stepped lightly on the snow, trying not to disturb him. I leaned down. Just close enough to hear his faint breaths, the soft rasp of someone barely holding on. His lips were pale, barely moving, and his eyes fluttered open for a second, focusing on me with a dim, confused gaze. So cold. He rasped, barely audible. Please. Help me. His words. Simple. Desperate. Hit me harder than I expected. I reached out, not even thinking about what I was doing. I touched his hand. His skin was ice. Cold. And the shiver that ran through me had nothing to do with the weather. I looked down at myself. I had nothing to offer him. Not really. Not now. I couldn't walk away. Not now. Without another thought, I yanked off my coat, feeling the sharp sting of the cold rush against my skin. I draped over it over the old man's shoulders, trying to make him as comfortable as I could. His eyes fluttered again, but this time, he didn't speak. I whispered, though I wasn't sure if he could even hear me. You'll be okay. Just stay warm. Don't give up. I said, my voice shaking. Both from the cold and the overwhelming sense of something shifting inside me. I stepped back, my hands trembling as the wind bit into me. Without my coat, I was exposed. Vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt in years. The cold made it difficult to breathe, but I didn't care. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of something. Hope. Maybe. Or at least a connection to someone. To something that wasn't broken. I looked at the man. One last time before I walked away, my footsteps heavy against the snow. I had no idea that this simple, seemingly insignificant act of kindness would change everything. But it did. And that night, I had no idea just how much. I kept walking. I kept walking. The sound of my boots crunching on the snow, louder than anything else. My breath was sharp in the cold. Each woman in that stood here. Each exhale visible in the dim streetlights. The night had swallowed me whole, and the park behind me felt like a distant memory. The weight of the coat I'd given away still felt like a part of me was missing. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to think about anything. I just needed to make it back to the motel room. The air was bitter, sharper than it had been before. I tugged my jacket tighter. But it wasn't the warmth I was missing. No. It was something more. A piece of myself that I had lost long ago. Something I hadn't even realized was still inside me. Until I let it go. Ankle and hair fan. I gave away my last piece of dignity, my last possession of any real value, and it didn't feel like weakness. It felt strangely freeing. I hadn't even thought about it when I did it. It wasn't until I'd started walking again, that I realized what I had done. In that moment, I hadn't felt the sting of loss. I hadn't been wrapped in the blanket of my own pain. I just acted. And now, as the cold length of hair, as the cold bit at my exposed skin, I wondered if that had been the only thing I could have done. The walk back to my motel felt longer than it should have. And ankle length hair. Maybe it was the darkness. Or the fact that there was nothing left to occupy my mind, but memories I wished I could forget. I had nothing. Nothing except a few battered clothes and a broken heart. And, for the first time in months, I wondered if maybe I could start again. Maybe I wasn't as far gone as I thought. I thought. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth. And the faint scent of exhaust from the streets. I pushed through it all, dragging my tired body one step at a time. But then, as I passed the park again, something stopped me. The bench where I'd left the old man, where I'd given up my coat, was empty now. No sign of him at all. I wasn't sure what I had expected. Maybe for him to still be there, waiting for me to return. But the bench was just as empty as I felt inside. I was about to turn away when I heard a voice. Hey. I froze. The voice was weak but clear. It was him. The old man Benson, the one I had helped. He was sitting in the same spot. But this time, he was looking up at me. His eyes slightly glazed from the cold, yet there was something in them. Something that wasn't there before. I approached him cautiously. "You okay?" I asked, my voice hoarse. I hadn't expected him to be here, not after what I'd done. He nodded slowly, his mouth curving up in a faint smile, the kind of smile that made you think maybe, just maybe, there was more hope left in the world than you realized. "I'm better now. Thanks to you." I didn't know what to say to that. "You're welcome," I managed to mutter. The words felt empty. They didn't hold any real weight anymore. Not like they used to. I was still so lost in my own head, trying to make sense of everything. "You've been through a lot," he said, his voice quieter now, like he was testing the waters. "I can see it in your eyes." I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't wrong. He was right, but I didn't want to talk about it. Han? I didn't want to unload all of my pain onto a stranger who had his own battles to fight. But his eyes. There was something about the way he looked at me. As if he understood. "You know," he continued, his voice gentle. "Sometimes life gives us a chance to start over. It's just a matter of knowing when to take it." I didn't respond. Instead, I sat down on the bench next to him, trying to process his words. Start over. How? What did that even mean when everything felt like it was crumbling apart? How could I start over when I had nothing left but the remnants of a failed life? But Benson's presence was different. It was like he wasn't judging me. He wasn't offering me pity. He wasn't trying to fix me. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. He was just there, offering his company in the silence, letting me feel the weight of my own thoughts without trying to push them away. I looked up at him. And for a brief moment, I saw him differently. He wasn't just an old man in the cold. He wasn't just someone I'd helped out of instinct. Oniwisen. He was someone who had lived through his own storm. And somehow, despite it all, he had found a way to keep going. Maybe that was why he was here. Why he was still breathing. Even after all the years that life had thrown at him. I'd been lost. I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to find my way back." Benson's smile softened, and he nodded slowly. "I know what that feels like," he said. "But sometimes you don't find your way back. You just keep moving forward." I didn't know what that meant. Maybe I never would. Family had ankle-length hair. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was completely alone in this. There was something about Benson that made me think maybe, just maybe, I could make it out of this mess. He reached into his bag and pulled out a crumpled, half-eaten sandwich, holding it out to me. "You tale. You hungry?" I took it from him without hesitation, feeling a strange sense of gratitude for the simplest of gestures. I didn't realize how hungry I had been, physically, mentally, and emotionally, until now. I bit into the sandwich, the taste not mattering as much as the act itself. There, in the cold night, with nothing but the two of us sitting on the park bench, I felt a flicker of warmth spread through me. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We didn't speak much more after that. Ennis allens one losers. He finished his sandwich, and I sat there, trying to hold on to the peace that seemed to settle between us. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if I could even make it through the next day without falling apart. But in that moment, I knew I wasn't completely alone. For the first time, in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to do everything on my own. And that, in itself, was a small but meaningful step forward. The days that followed that cold night were blurry, a mix of exhaustion, confusion, and quiet reflection. I went through the motions, working odd jobs, keeping to myself, my mind constantly drifting back to the park bench. To Benson. I couldn't shake the image of him there, the old man, with nothing left but a glimmer of kindness, as if his soul had survived through the harshest of storms. I hadn't thought much about him at first, but now, every time I passed by that park, my thoughts inevitably turned to him. One evening, each woman echoes share, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, and the streetlights flickered to life, I decided to return. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I was just tired of being lost, or maybe I felt a need to repay the kindness he'd shown by simply being there. But I had to see him again. The park was eerily quiet. Hair. Just the distant hum of traffic and the occasional sound of leaves rustling in the wind. I walked to the same bench where we'd sat, half expecting to find it empty. But when I reached it, there he was, Benson. Idahard had ankle-length hair. His gray hair was a bit messier, his coat a little more worn, but he was sitting there, just as he had been before, staring off into the distance. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. But then he turned, and his eyes locked with mine. There was no recognition, no sense of surprise. Just that same quiet, steady gaze. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said, his voice hoarse but not unpleasant. "But I'm glad you did." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. I don't know why I'm here." He gave me a small smile. "Sometimes, you don't need to know. You just do what feels right." I lowered myself onto the bench next to him, not quite as self-conscious as I had been before. The weight of everything. The betrayal, the loss, the nights spent alone, felt a little less heavy when I was near him. We sat there in silence for a while. The world around us seemed to slow down, the sounds of the city blending into the background. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. In fact, it was almost peaceful. "I've been thinking about what you said," I finally admitted, my voice softer than I intended. "About moving forward." Benson didn't look at me right away, but I could tell he was listening. He nodded, his gaze still fixed ahead. "It's not about forgetting the past, son. It's about deciding what you're going to do with it. You can let it weigh you down, or you can use it to find your way out." I didn't know how to respond to that. The weight of my past, the things I'd lost, the betrayals that had broken me, felt like chains, heavy and unforgiving, but something about his words felt true, as though they were a lifeline I wasn't sure I was ready to grasp. "I don't know if I can," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "It all feels like too much. I've lost everything. How do I move forward when I don't even know who I am anymore?" Benson finally turned to me, his gaze steady and knowing. "You're not the first to ask that, and you won't be the last. But moving forward doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. It means you take one step. Just one, even if it's small." I looked down at my hands, worn and calloused from the hard work. And I realized for the first time in weeks, I wasn't feeling quite as hollow. Maybe it was the small act of kindness I had offered him. Maybe it was the simple fact that someone was listening. "I don't know where to start," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Benson's eyes softened. But he didn't look away. "Start by letting yourself Breathe, son. That's all you can do right now. I didn't know what Benson's life had been like. But I knew that whatever storms he'd weathered, he had learned something about survival that I hadn't. I felt both frustrated and strangely relieved that he wasn't giving me a quick fix or easy advice. He wasn't offering false hope, he was just showing up. I'm not sure I can do this alone, I said. The words came out before I could stop them. Benson's gaze remained steady, his weathered face full of quiet wisdom. But you don't have to. But you have to be willing to accept the help when it comes. And sometimes, that help comes from places you least expect. The way he said, it made me pause. I wasn't sure if he was talking about himself or something more, but it didn't matter. The moment felt important. Like something was shifting in me. I'll try, I said, more to myself than to him. The words felt foreign, but they were the first step I had taken in a long time. Benson reached into his bag, pulling out a small, crumpled sandwich wrapped in wax paper. He handed it to me without a word, and I took it, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through me. It wasn't just the sandwich. It was a simple act of sharing something. It was a sign of trust, however small. Thanks, I muttered, my voice thick with emotion. Benson smiled again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just gratitude, it was understanding. We sat together in the park. Two strangers brought together by the most unlikely of circumstances. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I had thought. As I ate the sandwich, I realized something I hadn't in a while. Maybe I hadn't lost everything. Maybe the journey wasn't over. Maybe the journey wasn't over. And even if I wasn't sure of where it would lead, I knew that I had to start somewhere. The days dragged on. Each one feeling like an endless loop of disappointment and struggle. Each woman's family had ankle-length hair. I continued with my odd jobs, working at a diner during the day, unloading trucks at warehouses at night. The routine was as exhausting as it was soul-sucking. I hadn't felt truly alive in months, only going through the motions, trying to keep my head above water. But each time I walked past the park, where Benson and I had shared that brief moment of connection, something in me stirred. It had been weeks since I'd seen him, and I couldn't help but wonder if he was still out there, still sitting on that same bench, waiting. Or perhaps he had moved on. Perhaps he had seen enough of the world to know when to let go. But something in me told me I needed to find him again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered to life, I found myself walking back to that same park. The cold air bit at my skin, the sharp, almost painful chill reminding me of everything I had lost. But as I turned the corner, into the park, there he was, Benson, sitting on the same bench. His coat now more ragged than before, but still there. He looked up as I approached, his tired eyes meeting mine, with a silent understanding. Thought I might see you again, he said, his voice raspy but calm. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I didn't know why I was here. Part of me thought I could offer him some kind of help. Each woman in his family had anchor part of me. The part that had been struggling with so much wondered if I was the one who needed help. I didn't know if you'd be here, I said, my voice rough from the cold. I didn't know if. I don't know what I expected. Benson smiled. A small, knowing curve of his lips. Ankle failure sometimes. Sometimes, you just have to trust that things will show up when they need to. Like you, for instance. I sat down next to him without thinking. The silence between us was comfortable, not awkward, as if the years of struggle had brought us to a place where we could just be. Each was strange, but I found that I didn't feel the need to explain myself to him. Maybe he already knew everything without me saying a word. "You've been through a lot," he said after a long pause, his voice quieter now. "But you're still here. And that means something." I didn't know how to respond to that. I wanted to say something meaningful. Something that would explain how lost I felt. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, my chest tight with emotion. Benson continued, his voice softer this time. "You're fighting a battle, son. But it's the right battle. Don't forget that." I glanced at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" He looked at me, his eyes steady. "The world will try to knock you down. Over and over again. But the real fight isn't with what's around you. It's with what's inside you. Don't let it break you." I absorbed his words, trying to make sense of them. They weren't some magic solution, but they resonated with me in a way that nothing else had in a long time. I had been so consumed by everything I'd lost. My job, my family, my sense of self, that I hadn't realized how much of my fight had turned inward. The anger, the bitterness, the self-doubt, it was all eating me up, day after day. Maybe that was the fight I needed to face. "You're stronger than you think," Benson said, almost as if reading my mind. "But you can't do it alone." I blinked at him, taken aback. "What do you mean?" He let out a small laugh, though it wasn't mocking. "You can only carry so much weight before it breaks you. Let someone help you. Let yourself be helped." The words. Simple. Yet they hit me harder than anything else he had said. I wasn't used to asking for help. I had been raised to be strong, to do things on my own, to never show weakness. But maybe Benson was right. Maybe my pride, my refusal to lean on anyone, was the thing that had kept me from moving forward. Ian and his family had ankle-length hair. For the first time in what felt like forever, I realized that I didn't have to carry this weight alone. I didn't have to do everything by myself. But the question was, who could I trust to help me? Benson didn't answer my unspoken question. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled sandwich from his bag, handing it to me with a nod. "It's not much, but it's all I have to offer." I took the sandwich without hesitation, a strange warmth spreading through me at the simplicity of the gesture. We ate in silence, the sound of the city distant behind us. For once, I didn't feel the overwhelming weight of my failures pressing on me. I didn't feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to fall into the abyss. Instead, I felt grounded as if the ground beneath me wasn't as fragile as I had once believed. When we finished eating, I sat back, my thoughts clearer than they had been in weeks. The world hadn't magically fixed itself, but in that moment, I realized I had a choice. I could keep wallowing in the ruins of my past, or I could take a step forward, small, uncertain, but mine. Benson stood up slowly, stretching his stiff muscles. "I'll be here," he said. "Whenever you need to talk, or whenever you need someone to listen. Just remember, you're not as alone as you think." I watched him walk away, a sense of peace settling over me that I hadn't expected. Maybe I didn't have all the answers yet. Maybe I didn't know how to pick up the broken pieces of my life and make them whole again. But But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so lost. And maybe that was the first step toward something better. The days after I met Benson blurred together in a haze. It was as if the act of giving away my coat had cracked open something inside me. Something I hadn't even realized was there. At walking through my daily grind, but there was a shift. I didn't feel quite so empty. I didn't feel as if I were just drifting from one moment to the next, trying to forget the pieces of my life I'd lost. But despite the small comfort I'd found, life hadn't stopped moving. Ankle-length hair. I had bills piling up, reminders of everything I had failed to hold on to. My old life, the one I had worked so hard to build, still haunted me. And yet, something in me couldn't let go of what Benson had said about moving forward, about fighting for something more. I couldn't just keep living in the shadows of my past. I had to do something. I had to make choice. Then, one morning, the phone rang. The sound startled me, almost too loudly in the silence of my tiny motel room. I stared at it for a moment before picking up, unsure of what to expect. Mr. Hayden. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. It took me a moment to place it, but when I did, my stomach tightened. This is Sarah from Harlow Energy. We'd like to offer you a position. I froze. Harlow Energy. The company I had worked for. The company I had been fired from after the betrayal. For a second, I thought I must have misheard her. There was no way they'd want me back. I don't understand, I said, my voice hoarse. After everything that happened, why would you want me back? There was a pause. Then Sarah's voice softened. It's not that simple. When you've had ankle-length hair, you've been recommended for a position by someone who has taken a deep interest in your case. We'd like you to come in for an interview. It's a senior position in the engineering department. You'll be reporting directly to our new CEO, Benson Harlow. Benson Harlow. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Benson, the man I had helped that cold night in the park, had some influence here. The connection stunned me. I had thought of Benson as just an old man, someone whose life was worlds apart from mine. And yet, here he was, pulling strings in ways I hadn't even imagined. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why would Benson want me in his company, after everything? He sees something in you, Hayden. He believes in second chances. And he's willing to give you one. My hands trembled as I held the phone. The weight of her words sinking in. This was it. This was the moment I had to decide whether to keep holding on to my past failures, or to step forward. Uncertain and hesitant. But, with a chance to rebuild, I agreed. To the interview. The next day, I stood in front of the glass doors of Harlow Energy. My heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't set foot in this building since the day I was fired. The place that had once been my professional home felt foreign now. Like a relic of a life I no longer recognized. The lobby was just as I remembered, sleek, polished, and cold. It was filled with the hum of quiet conversations, the clink of coffee cups, and the low murmur of phones ringing. But none of it mattered. My mind was focused on one thing: Benson Harlow. I was ushered into an office that seemed too grand for someone like me, a simple desk with expensive looking furniture surrounding it. I took a seat, my mind racing, my heart thumping in my chest. And then, the door opened. There he was. Benson Harlow. Not the homeless man I had met in the park, but the CEO of Harlow Energy. His presence filled the room, confident and commanding. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture perfect. For a moment, I couldn't speak.
Uncle.
The man I had helped in the park, the one who had thanked me for giving him my coat, was now standing before me, as if he had been waiting for me all along. "Mr. Ritter," he said, his voice steady and calm. "It's good to see you again." I nodded, still trying to process what was happening. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect any of this. Benson sat down across from me, his eyes never leaving mine. "I understand. It's not every day someone gets a second chance. But you've proven yourself to be someone who doesn't give up, even when the world has turned its back on you." I could hardly believe it. Here I was, sitting in front of the very man I had helped without knowing who he was. And now he was offering me a second chance. A chance to rebuild, to prove I was more than the man who had been betrayed. I didn't know what this meant yet. I didn't know how I could ever repay him for what he was offering. But as I sat there, listening to him speak about the future, I realized that maybe this was what I had been waiting for all along. A way out of the darkness. A way back to myself. "Chair. You're going to have to work hard," Benson said, his voice low but firm. "This won't be easy. But I believe you have what it takes." "I know you leng to me." I nodded, the weight of his words settling into me. "I'll do whatever it takes." And for the first time in what felt like a long time, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe I hadn't lost everything after all. Maybe this was the chance I needed. Benson smiled, a slight curve of his lips that was more reassuring than anything else. "I'm glad to hear that. Welcome to Harlow Energy, Mr. Ritter. You'll start tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word lingered in my mind, full of promise. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. This was my chance to rebuild, to become the man I was meant to be. And this time, I wouldn't be doing it alone. The next few days passed in a blur. The transition from the empty, broken world I had living in to the hustle and bustle of Harlow Energy was overwhelming, to say the least. Walking through the sleek, polished hallways felt surreal, as if I were entering someone else's life. The walls, adorned with expensive artwork and state of the art technology, seemed to mock my past, reminding me of everything I had lost. But somehow, I pushed through it. Each morning, I woke up in my small, modest apartment, still getting used to the idea that I had a new beginning. The old place I had stayed in, the motel room where I'd spent too many sleepless nights, now felt like a lifetime ago. I had traded those cold, lonely walls for something that had a chance at being real, a place to build something that was mine. Kept my head down at work, focusing on the tasks at hand, learning quickly how everything worked at Harlow Energy. The engineering department was complex, a well-oiled machine of its own. I had my doubts though. I didn't know if I belonged there. After all, I wasn't the same person who had left here months ago. Everything felt so different now. And length of hair. There were days when I still couldn't believe that I had been given a second chance. But I wasn't foolish enough to let it slip away. Benson's influence hung over everything. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. It was impossible to ignore the way he commanded respect from everyone, even from the people who had once been my colleagues. I noticed the subtle shifts in how the staff interacted with me. The ankle-length hair, the quiet nods of recognition, the way some of the younger engineers seemed more eager to help me out. as if they were all waiting to see what I'd do next. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, my mind a bit too distracted by the weight of my past to focus, I was interrupted by a knock at my office door. I looked up, startled to see one of the senior engineers, Daniel, standing in the doorway. He was a bit older than me, well dressed, his confident stance showing the power he had in the company. "You're the new guy," he said with a slight smile, his voice smooth and collected. "Benson's right, handman." Now, I shifted in my chair, unsure of what to say. "I'm just getting started." He raised an eyebrow, as if amused by my modesty. "Well, don't let that fool you. Benson doesn't give out second chances to just anyone. You've got a long way to go to prove yourself." I met his gaze, feeling an uneasy tension in the air. "I'm aware," I replied quietly. "But I'm here to do the work." Daniel chuckled, the sound lacking any warmth. "That's the right attitude. Just don't forget that in this company, things aren't always what they seem. People get ahead not just by doing the work, but by knowing how to play the game." I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. "I'm not here to play any games." His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see." With that. He turned and walked out, leaving me with a heavy silence in the room. I didn't know what his words meant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something more. Something deeper. Darker. The next few weeks passed with the same rhythm. Work, long hours, and the constant feeling of being watched. But I kept my focus on the tasks at hand. I was determined to prove that I wasn't just here because of Benson's recommendation. I was here because I deserved it. Then, one Friday evening, as the workday wound down and the building began to empty, I was finishing up some paperwork when Benson himself walked into my office. I stood up quickly, surprised to see him. "Mr. Harlow," I greeted, trying to sound composed. He smiled, his presence still as commanding as ever. "I've been hearing good things about you, Hayden." I felt my chest tighten. "Thank you, sir." He stepped closer, his gaze sharp but thoughtful. "I think you're starting to understand what this company is about. But there's more to it than just the work, you know. It's about seeing the bigger picture." I nodded, unsure where this conversation was going. "I'm trying to keep up." Benson's smile softened, just a little. "You're doing more than keeping up. But there are things you'll need to learn. Things I can't teach you through a desk job or an office chair." I tilted my head slightly, confused. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the edge of my desk, his expression growing more serious. "You've been given a chance here, Hayden, but that means you're going to have to take risks. You're going to have to prove that you're more than just a survivor. You need to show the world what you're capable of." I swallowed, trying to hold his gaze. "I'm ready." Benson nodded, his eyes calculating, as if he were seeing something in me I couldn't yet understand. "Good. Keep that attitude. But remember, Hayden, sometimes you have to make the difficult choices. The ones that don't always feel right at first. That's the true test of strength." I didn't know what that meant, but there was something in his words that stayed with me. A seed planted deep in my mind. I had been given a second chance, but I didn't know what it would cost me. As Benson left my office, I sat there for a long while. The weight of his words heavy in the silence. The path ahead wasn't clear, but I knew one thing. I had to be ready for whatever came next. Khoisan had ankle-length hair. The weeks after that conversation with Benson felt like a blur. But one thing was clear: I was no longer just treading water. I was moving forward. Had ankle-length hair. The work at Harlow Energy became my anchor. A place where I could focus on something other than the failures of my past. Every project I took on, I gave it everything I had. It was exhausting, but the routine felt good. It felt like I was building something again. But there was always the undercurrent. The subtle tension I couldn't ignore. Benson had told me there would be risks. Decisions that would push me past my comfort zone. I hadn't fully understood what that meant. But I was starting to get it. One morning, I was summoned to a meeting. On the top floor, where the executive offices were located. As I stepped off the elevator, I was greeted by the usual cold, modern decor, glass walls, sleek furniture, everything designed to impress. A local lankogant. But it was the look on Benson's face that caught my attention as I entered his office. He was sitting at his desk. His sharp gaze focused on the paperwork in front of him, but there was something different in the air. Something heavier. Sit down. Hayden, he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. I took a seat across from him, wondering what this meeting was about. Benson didn't waste time with pleasantries. He was all business. I need you to handle something. He began, looking up from the papers in front of him. There's an issue with one of our suppliers. A major one. If it's not handled quickly, it could threaten the entire operation. I nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on my shoulders. What's the problem? Benson's eyes narrowed. It's a financial issue. One that, if exposed, could ruin our reputation. I need you two to go in, figure out what's going on and make sure the company is protected. If this thing leaks, it could destroy everything. His words hung in the air. Each woman in his family had ankle. And at Harlow Energy for less than a month. And here I was, being tasked with something that could make or break my career. I hadn't even fully grasped the scale of what was at stake. But I knew this was the test Benson had warned me about. I'll take care of it, I said, trying to mask the unease in my voice. How do you want me to proceed? Benson slid a folder across the desk to me. Here's everything you need to know. You'll be meeting with the supplier's executives this afternoon. I've already made sure the meeting is set up. You need to gather the information quickly and discreetly. Do whatever it takes to get the facts. I took the folder, my fingers tingling with a mix of excitement and fear. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this kind of responsibility, but I knew I had no choice. This was my moment to prove that I could handle the pressure, that I could step up when it mattered most. I won't let you down, I said, standing up to leave. Benson gave a small nod, but there was something unreadable in his expression. I know you won't. Each woman had ankle-length hair. As I left his office and made my way to the meeting, the weight of the task ahead began to sink in. This wasn't just about doing a job anymore. This was about proving myself. Hayden then Kreven. Proven I could not only survive, but thrive in this world that seemed so foreign to me. Njuhel hair, Ifwit loud, about making my mark, about showing that I had the strength to handle whatever came my way. The meeting with the supplier's executives was intense. They were defensive, unwilling to admit there was a problem. But I pushed them, asking questions they didn't want to answer. Slowly, The cracks began to show. The financial discrepancies. The shady dealings. The lies they had been hiding. It was all there. Just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. By the end of the meeting, I had the information I needed. I knew what was going on. But I also knew that exposing it would be risky. Too risky for me to do alone. I had no choice but to go back to Benson. To trust that he would back me up. Ayant. When I returned to his office and laid everything out in front of him, Benson didn't flinch. He didn't even hesitate. "Well, take care of it," he said, his voice cold but firm. "You did well." I felt a rush of pride, but it was fleeting. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning of something bigger than I had ever imagined. But as I left his office, my heart racing with the adrenaline of the confrontation, I realized something important. I wasn't just doing this for Benson, or for Harlow Energy. I was doing this for me. This was my chance to rebuild. To prove I could not only handle the pressure, but come out on top. The risks were higher than ever. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face them. Heavenly ass hair. The days following the showdown at Harlow Energy moved quickly, but the weight of the decisions I had made still lingered. Benson had handled the supplier issue with the precision I expected. The company was safe. The scandal averted, but the aftermath of the crisis left me standing on the edge of something far more dangerous. My life was changing, but not just because of the work I was doing. I had been given a second chance. And every part of me was determined to make the most of it. But the closer I got to finding my place in this new world, the more I felt the pull of the past, the anger, and the resentment that had almost consumed me. I could feel the old habits creeping in, the bitterness, the thoughts that maybe I was never meant to rise above the wreckage of my life. One afternoon, as I walked through the lobby of Harlow Energy, I was stopped by someone I hadn't expected to see. Sarah, the woman from the legal team, who had helped me set up my interview. She was holding a folder. Her face serious, but not unfriendly. "Hayden, do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice a little hesitant. I nodded and followed her to one of the quieter areas of the building. While she cried there, away from the noise of the offices. As we sat down, I couldn't help but wonder why she was looking at me like that. "I'd been hearing some things," she started, her tone careful, "about the way things went down with the supplier. People are starting to talk." I stiffened, my chest tightening. Each woman in his family hadn't expected anyone to notice the risks I had taken. I didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. But the reality hit me hard in a company this big. Nothing stayed quiet for long. "What kind of things?" I asked, my voice controlled. But inside, I was on edge. Sarah leaned in slightly, her gaze shifting as if weighing her next words. "Benson's noticed your efforts. I don't know how to hire. I've also heard that some of the higher-ups aren't too happy with the way you handled things. They're not sure if you're playing by the rules." My pulse quickened. I hadn't done anything I thought was out of line. I had followed Benson's instructions. But now it was clear to me. Nothing in this company was ever as simple as it seemed. "Are they planning to do anything about it?" I asked. Not sure if I wanted to know the answer. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "They're considering putting you through a review process. It's routine for new hires at your level, but let's just say, it could go either way." I let her words sink in. A review meant more scrutiny, More tests. More risks. And with those risks, came the very real possibility that I would lose everything again. But, this time, I couldn't afford to fail. I've been in your position before, Sarah said, breaking my train of thought. No. What it's like to feel like you're constantly walking a tightrope. But, Hayden, you've got something that most people here don't. I looked at her, unsure of what she meant. You have the ability to make things right, she continued, her voice firm. You've proven that. But you also need to understand that in this world, it's not just about the work you do. It's about the people you trust. Her words hung in the air. And for the first time since I started at Harlow Energy, I realized that that the decisions I made wouldn't just affect me. They would affect everyone around me. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Do you think I can handle this? I asked, unsure whether she meant to offer encouragement or a warning. She gave a small, reassuring smile. I think you can. But it's going to take more than just hard work. It's going to take trust. And it's going to take more risks than you think. I sat there for a long moment, her words sinking in. Trust. It was something I hadn't been able to give in years. And now, it seemed, I was being forced to give it again, if I wanted to keep moving forward. The next few days passed quickly. And before I knew it, I found myself sitting in a meeting with the higher ups at Harlow Energy. My palms were sweaty, my thoughts a jumbled mess, but I kept my posture straight, my eyes focused. Benson was there, too. His presence as commanding as ever. Hayden, one of the executives said, leaning forward, you've shown potential. But potential isn't enough here. We need someone we can trust, someone who understands that power isn't just about what you know, but who you know. We need to know if you can handle this responsibility. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment. The test I had been waiting for. And the pressure felt suffocating. I can handle it, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of doubts swirling inside me. I've proven that. The room was silent for a beat. And then, finally, Benson spoke. I believe him. That was all it took. The review was over. I was in. As I left the meeting, feeling of disbelief washed over me. I had done it. I had passed. But even though I had succeeded, the fight wasn't over. It never would be. The decisions I had made, the trust I had begun to build, had brought me here. But I knew that in the world I was now a part of, there were more battles to fight, more risk to take. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready for them. And this time, I wasn't going to back down,